All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending upon where you happen to be in the world today. Welcome to today's webinar. We're going to be we have the members of the Zowe community and Zowe leadership here that are going to be digging into the latest Zowe LTS release, which is a really, really exciting milestone for this project. And it showcases the maturity and the downstream adoption that is starting to happen. We're going to give it a few minutes for people to come in here. So we'll probably get started roughly 5 after the hour. So hang tight and we'll get back started. All right, we're at 5 past the hour, so I suggest we get on going here. Welcome to the webinar today. We have a great panel of folks across the Zowe project. They're going to be with us here today. Just going quickly here from right to left here, we have Bruce Armstrong, who has been a member of the Zowe Leadership Committee and as a part of IBM. He's the Z offering, is an IBM Z offering manager, and he really focuses on Zowe and the related technologies. We have Peter Fandel, who's also a member of the Zowe Leadership Committee, and his role is with Rocket Software, Senior Director of Product Management, and he really focuses on a number of the different open source engagements with the communities and offerings built from them. And Rose Sakach from Broadcom. She's a global product manager for their Mainframe division. And for Zowe, she serves on the Zowe Onboarding Squad as their Scrum Master. So we have a great set of folks here today. After a little bit of introduction, we're going to dig more into it. We're going to remind everyone what Zowe is again. we're going to dig into what is the Zowe LTS release as a whole and give it kind of an overview of the concept of what the Zowe community is looking to drive here, and what it means for you as a downstream consumer of this technology. We'll talk about the Zowe Conformance Program, which is being updated for the LTS release, and we'll talk about some of the features and changes that have happened in here. And then a peek into the future of Zowe, where are the features, what's coming on, what's coming down the pipe, and then how to get involved, and we'll have some time at the end for Q&A. But I really want to kick things off around the Open Mainframe project, which is the host here of the Zowe project. And it's a broad community that brings together not only supporting organizations, but hosted projects, and really looks to make a broad impact on the open source community on the mainframe by being that focal point for that community to come together, for them to be able to collaborate, for them to be able to communicate broadly around and be a thought leadership angle for open source on the mainframe. And then also just being that place where people can congregate, they can come, they can discuss topics of how this ecosystem continues to evolve. And none of this is possible without the 36 supporting organizations globally, from vendors to systems providers to leaders in the space to the universities. All of them are critical to this project's success. And if we look at those projects, it's a vast number that are across the ecosystem here. I think the slide here should show 9 of them, hopefully. Oh, may bump the slide ahead one. Sorry. Zowe is definitely a flagship project amongst many here we have at the foundation. I would really encourage everyone to take a look at all the projects we're hosting. These are all vendor neutral, they're open governance, and they're all opportunities for anybody in the community to get involved and help add more sustainability into the mainframe world. Definitely check that out, openmainframeproject.org/projects. In particular, I want to call out one of our newest projects, which has made quite a splash, is on the COBOL front. We launched a COBOL programming course as a new incubation project back last month, and it has taken off like wildfire. This programming course alone has attracted people across GitHub. I think 1,400 stars on GitHub, which is a ridiculously high number for such a new project. Numerous issues, numerous contributions coming from the mainframe community and beyond. And we're already even seeing some new innovation happening there and helping support different IDE environments and sort of building out that coursework over time. As a part of that announcement, there was also a call for COBOL talent out there. As you recall, back in April, this was a large concern here with the COVID crisis, really in its roots there, that many of these systems did not have the talent needed to sustain them. And we saw more than 1,600 individuals quickly come together and volunteer their efforts, and a number of those are being connected to opportunities globally. And we've established a Q&A forum for the COBOL community to communicate, collaborate, talk about best practices, ideas, starting just to create this focal point of what this is all about. Take a look more about this on our website under our projects entitled COBOL Training Course. And last but not least, I want to, one of the things that we, while we're definitely a host of projects, we recognize that this space is very broad, and we want to make sure that space is recognized appropriately out there. And along with that, the larger commercial ecosystem that is building upon these offerings to really pull that together. So, with our driving force here of being that sustainable engine to help support this ecosystem, the Open Mainframe landscape, which you can check out at landscape.openmainframeproject.org, or if you don't feel like typing landscape all out, you can just type out l.openmainframeproject.org, it's a great way to understand what this full landscape looks like. Everything from the open source projects that are very specific to the area, projects that are having broad support of the S390X and mainframe community, along with the Linux distributions, the companies that are driving Zowe Conformance solutions, and just the vendors that are providing, fiduciary support. Go check this out. It's also a community resource, so we encourage you to include this in any presentations, anytime you're talking with customers, partners, vendors. And if you see things that are missing up here, it's all up on GitHub, so it's a pull request away from adding, and we're happy to work with you to help get that going. But definitely check out the landscape. So with no further ado, I want to move forward here to what is Zowe, and I want to hand it off to Peter Fandel.
All right, thank you, John, for that intro. So now on to another intro, specifically introducing what is Zowe. So Zowe is an open source software project under the Open Mainframe project, which is also under the Linux Foundation. Zowe was released to the world in February of last year with initial contributions from Broadcom, IBM, and Rocket Software. The impetus for Zowe's creation was the need for an open, modern, and standard platform for application development on the mainframe. Next slide, please. So what is Zowe? It is an integrated and extensible open source ecosystem for ZOS with a coherent and curated set of user and programmatic interfaces. Next slide, please. Those interfaces provide consistent access to ZOS systems and services. They leverage industry standard methodologies and standards, which are or should be familiar to the vast majority of today's developers. And this is the part that is what we're hoping to achieve with success with Zowe, is to have those interfaces become commonly accepted as the standard way of getting into the mainframe by the community. So Zowe is delivered as a binary download, which is a very important detail because we want to make it easily consumable so that the consumer does not need to have to figure out how to build it themselves. And this binary download comes with a set of applications built on top of that framework, and together they deliver a cloud-like integration experience that is intended to unify the organization's IT infrastructure and application delivery. Next slide, please. The end users that are targeted by Zowe are those at the bottom of the screen there. So DevOps engineers, application developers, sysprogs or systems administrators, and operators responsible for the health and monitoring of the mainframe operating system itself and mainframe subsystems and enterprise applications like DB2, et cetera. Next slide, please. So in terms of components, there are four main sub-projects or component groups within Zowe. Next slide, please. So closest to the ZOS systems themselves, you have the API mediation layer and a set of built-in microservices. So the API mediation layer, actually go back for a sec, the API mediation layer, backwards, thank you. The API mediation layer acts as a reverse proxy to any number of clients to it. So it provides a unified single point of entry to any number of consumers with single sign-on and authentication, so that you don't have to do that over again for all the consumers. So the consumers of the API mediation layer, if you could go to the next slide, are first the CLI sub-project. Now, this is a command line interface primarily used for DevOps that enables the user to chain together commands into ZOS that do things like CI/CD, build, automated test, and whatnot. And those are backed by the microservices. Next slide, please. Another major component, this is actually, was not in the original Zowe, and it has proved extremely popular, I think with the largest number of downloads, we call simply the Zowe Explorer. And this is an infrastructure and an extension. Today, it's only an extension to VS Code, but it may entail extensions to other applications in the future. And what it enables the user today of VS Code to do is they're in their VS Code environment, and they have the extension gives them the ability to work with, open, manipulate mainframe data sets. Next slide, please. And then you have the application framework. The application framework outwardly, most visibly, it presents a user experience, a visual user experience that is akin to the desktop on your Macintosh or your Windows, where you've got a launch bar at the bottom and you can launch multiple applications, and each application can have many windows, and they're all on a desktop. However, the difference is that entire desktop experience is residing inside of a web browser. And it has the same single sign-on capabilities, so it's very secure. And then lastly, next slide, please. Actually, before I need to embellish this, so each one of these major subcomponents, the CLI, the Explorer, and the application framework, they all come built in with plugins that enable you to do certain things. So for example, the CLI comes with a Kix plugin. The application framework comes with a 3270 emulator. So they come with existing plugins. And then next slide. And then if you are a developer, you can then extend by adding additional homemade plugins that you either use within your organization, or you could publish them and submit them for inclusion by the Zowe community. And all these plugins are often backed by additional microservices at the back end. Next slide, please. And then finally, all of the APIs, all of the microservices that are exposed via the API mediation layer can be called directly by the user. And that, in a nutshell, is what is Zowe.
All right, thanks, Peter. This is Bruce Armstrong. What I'll talk about now is what the significance is of the long-term support release we have announced. There's, I'll say, two major aspects of this. The first one here is on the packaging and install process that we've adopted. So those of you that might be familiar with what we did originally was Zowe was delivered as a PAX file. So, you know, conceptually a zipped up file that you would install in your ZOS environment. We clearly got feedback back that, you know, that is adequate for especially a dev test environment where people were wanting a quick and easy install to be able to play with Zowe. However, the feedback was, and those of you that are very familiar with ZOS install and packaging, kind of the de facto standard is what's called SMPE format. So one key aspect of what we've done as a lead up to declaring a long-term support release is we did support this de facto standard for packaging of an SMPE format. Now, there's more going on here than just the format, right? What this now provides is a vendor neutral way so that anyone can get a copy of Zowe, install it in their environment. Our base assumption is that you would have one instance per an LPAR to be able to take advantage of the single sign-on, a single API catalog and such. There is the option of being able to install more than one instances depending upon your circumstances. The other aspect of this packaging, and it's more the configuration process, was we reworked some of the configuration placement so that as we do software updates of Zowe, the configuration files for not only the Zowe components, but also any extensions that might be provided we're in a protected place in the install environment such that we could update the code without impacting the configuration information. I'll say the configuration process has gotten smarter with each release. We do provide a way to selectively start some of the back-end services so that you have what used to be hard prereqs. They're optional or softer prereqs so that you can get Zowe up and running quicker and easier than some of the prior releases. We do acknowledge that we've got some more work to do, right? We're working now on how do you know that you've got a genuine Zowe release regardless of where you've gotten it. And we are looking at the next generation of install and configuration packaging on the ZOS platform as well. So bottom line is you would have seen this previewed in releases, and now that we've gotten this piece of work done, that is a key aspect of what we're declaring in a long-term support release. If you go to the next slide, please. The other aspect of this is we've now declared what we call the active long-term support release. And we have declared what the open community will do for supporting the interfaces in Zowe. So for those of you that are writing extensions or making use of the interfaces, whether that's through the desktop or command line interface or API mediation layer, we are declaring those as stable interfaces going forward. Now, the terminology that we're using here is something that I'll say, have borrowed from the Node.js community. What you can think of what we've done over the past year since February of 2019, we were in a current phase where we were doing development, we were enhancing the capabilities, but during that current phase, we weren't quite ready to claim that the interfaces were all stable. As of the long-term support release that we have now delivered, we've entered what we call the active long-term support release. So the interfaces are stable, people can make use of it. The active aspect of this is we are going to continue to make enhancements, but those enhancements will be in such a way that they don't break any of the existing interfaces. They may enhance some of the existing interfaces, and you as exploiters of the infrastructure of Zowe will have the option of taking advantage of those enhancements, but we're saying that the interfaces themselves will not change. And we're saying that it's roughly a 2-year window where we will continue the support of those interfaces. Now there is a point in time, and the graph here implies it's roughly halfway through the 2-year period. It might be longer than that, but there will come a time when we will declare a maintenance long-term support, which from that point forward will be fixes only and not necessarily enhancements. The other takeaway from this slide is we will look at what we're needing to accomplish based upon feedback, and we will make a decision on an annual basis as to whether we think we need to reversion. A reversion would imply possible breaking changes, but again, we would give the open community plenty of notice of that. We would go through another current phase that anybody could work with the newer generation code, give us feedback on what they like and what they don't like. But you'll notice through the graphics here, there will only be one active long-term support release at a time that will have the both enhancements and fixes going on. And as I say, we don't have any plans right now to reversion, but we said that we kind of reserve the right on an annual basis to revisit whether we need to introduce changes. Let's go to the next couple slides. I've already talked about this, right? So this is here for your reference. You will also see that this is on the zowe.org website. So we may consider reversioning each year, but there's no guarantee that we will. Right now, we don't have a reason to reversion next year, but we've still got 6 months or so to go in this year. As we said, the current release typically would take 6 to 9 months where we're testing it, giving a preview in the community. You could argue that this first version took longer than that, but this was our version 1 release, so it took us a little while to get comfortable with claiming the stable releases. And I've already talked about active and the maintenance. So if you go to the next slide, please. The long-term support is just that. We are going to provide support through the open community, and you may ask what fixes when we enter the maintenance release would we say. That's documented on zowe.org. And we're going to talk next about the conformance program. So those of you that may have gotten conformance on the 2019 level of the code, you'll see that we have updated our conformance criteria and our badging process to now encourage folks to use this long-term support release, the interfaces that are there now, and as I mentioned, the way we do the install and configuration of the code has changed slightly. And May, one more slide, please. Yes, and here I'm just pointing folks to the additional information that I didn't get through. You can go to zowe.org. If you scroll down, you'll see a section called Release Timeline, and you can learn more, and it spells out our description of long-term support release, both active and maintenance, and that's there for your reference. So with that, I'll turn it over to Rose to talk about the conformance program.
Great, thanks, Bruce. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Hi, everyone. Great to be with you today. I'm Rose Sakach, as John mentioned. I'm Broadcom Product Manager responsible for CA Brightside Zowe CLI, and I'm the Zowe Onboarding Squad Scrum Master. And in addition to encouraging and facilitating the onboarding process for new Zowe contributors, we also help to formalize and support the Zowe Conformance Program. So what I'm going to do is I'll quickly review the Conformance Program in general and also share some of the modifications we made specifically around the long-term support release. So stay on this slide for me, May. Let's start with what is conformance. As Peter mentioned earlier, the Zowe framework is extensible by design. And as such, we encourage and welcome clients and vendors interested in extending Zowe with their own plugin, or as Peter mentioned, their homegrown or homemade contributions. But of course, we needed to put a program in place to ensure that extensions enhance Zowe without compromising it on any level. And with this in mind, the Zowe Conformance Program was developed by the Zowe community. This is an optional program for extenders. The program consists of a set of guidelines in the form of test criteria for each of the extensible components. Those components currently include APIs, CLI plugins, and plugin apps for the app framework. The criteria is a minimum set of requirements the extender must meet in order to ensure conformance is achieved. In a sense, this is sort of serves as a quality gate. Next slide. Moving on to why conformance. So the program was developed by the Zowe community, as I mentioned, as a means to ensure that each plugin and extension associated with a given Zowe component has met a minimum set of requirements that enable them to deliver functionality threaded throughout the Zowe ecosystem. And the requirements could be as simple as naming standards, or they could be more complex, like security requirements that enable single sign-on. The requirements are designed to provide interoperability amongst and between the Zowe components, to demand and sustain a high level of quality through best practices, and to ensure the user has a similar, very comfortable and expected Zowe experience. It's important to recognize that the program offers value to both the providers, the vendors who provide the extensions themselves, and customers that consume them. And let me explain how. As an extender of a Zowe conformant application, the conformance ensures that the application will behave as designed in the Zowe ecosystem. It helps to maximize the value of the application. It helps to ensure that other applications will not break my extension, and at the same time, mine won't break others. And the conformance badge demonstrates thought leadership, partnership, and general commitment to Zowe. And earning the badge allows me to market my application using the Zowe brand. On the consumer side, or the end user side of a Zowe conformant application, as a consumer, I'm able to leverage a common stack of infrastructure across multiple vendor applications. I'm granted a level of operational confidence, meaning I can trust the extension will work with the designated release or releases of Zowe. And there's also a high level of quality assurance gained, knowing that the extension has been exposed and vetted with the community. Next slide. So how did we revise the conformance program with the introduction of the long-term support release of Zowe? In general, we revised some foundational pieces of the program. We made some general program updates, including modifying the contents and format of the test criteria itself. That is, features that were specifically introduced with LTS needed conformance specifications. So the list of criteria got longer. One area, as Bruce mentioned, was the change in the ZOS installation. We also changed the format of the testing criteria. It originally was just a general Word document. We changed that to a table format, and we added a tag to each entry. I put in a snapshot of that table format on this slide on the right-hand side there, so you can see. This hopefully will make it easier for extenders to know what and when a new conformance criteria was added to that checklist. And then we also migrated the forms to GitHub for safekeeping and streamlining the change process itself. We modified the terms and conditions to allow extenders to retain badges. We also, the prior terms and condition gave the extenders a limited window of time in which they could apply for the latest conformance. And we heard back from a few of the extenders through the onboarding squad that that was something that was not achievable nor desirable. So we allowed, we changed the conformance criteria to enable folks to retain those badges. Also, this not having a specific timeline allows extenders to apply for the latest conformance. In this case, it would be V1 on their timeline whenever it's convenient for them. The extenders who had earned their Zowe 1.0 through 1.8, I guess we'll call it, conformance badge, which we marked with the 2019 badge, will continue to retain those badges. And then finally, we always are looking to improve the conformance process, and will continue to revise throughout the active LTS phase. But we will do so by indicating in the conformance test criteria itself as new features come along. Next slide. Okay, so essentially, any software vendor can build Zowe conformant offerings. The process is very straightforward. You can apply for conformance for a new extension. We also recommend that you apply for V1 conformance for any existing 2019 conformant apps. simple, straightforward 3-step process: prepare, test, and submit. That would be the responsibility of the requester. Step 4 is the responsibility of the Open Mainframe project, where they will review and approve your application. The Open Mainframe project is involved. They keep the process vendor neutral, and they provide an unbiased assessment and certainly ensure confidentiality. The Zowe community and the onboarding squad in particular determines, presents, and maintains the conformance criteria and the test evaluation guides, as well as terms and conditions. And we do all this in conjunction with the Open Mainframe project. Okay, the conformance page at zowe.org, this is sort of a snippet of that page, proudly displays all of the Zowe 1.0 through 1.8 Zowe Conformant apps with the 2019 badge. You can expect to see the Zowe V1 LTS conformant applications on the updated conformance page, showing V1 conformant components with the V1 badge, again, aligning with the V1 LTS release. And then finally, I believe I have one more slide here. Yeah, so you are going to want to go ahead and plan to earn your V1 LTS conformance badge, especially if you have an existing 2019 badge. Again, we have a few more requirements added to the testing criteria. And here's some suggestions to sort of help you get started. Go ahead and go out and review the conformance program details now. The forms have been updated. They are in table format and they do reflect the LTS criteria. Print them, make sure that all of the required entries in those forms align with your technical plans. And do, you know, if you can't submit right away, have a plan and target a date to submit for your conformance. And certainly the Open Mainframe project and the Zowe onboarding squad is available for you if you need any assistance or have any, you know, comments, questions, what have you. We're happy to help. Back to you, Peter.
Okay, thank you, Rose. So me again, Peter Fandel. I'm here to talk about how Zowe is enterprise and production ready. And the themes here of this presentation are security, resilience and scaling, and serviceability. However, the previous two presentations by Rose and by Bruce are critical components of making a software enterprise and production ready. They mostly address quality and stability and giving the reassurance that that those remain so, and also the making it a good user experience for download and install are all parts of those projects. So I'm going to be talking about other aspects of enterprise and production ready: security, resilience, scaling, and serviceability. So customers who want to build offerings on top of Zowe or who want to use Zowe-based products need to have these reassurances that that we meet all of these feature goals before they go ready, go into production. So that's what this is all about. So next slide, please. So in terms of security, all of the Zowe components today support SSO. This is both for, that stands for single sign-on. So both for interactive support. So for example, in the virtual desktop, when you do a login, that's single sign-on, and also via the APIs through Java Web Tokens. All of the transport, the communication transports end-to-end for all Zowe components support HTTPS and are at the level of TLS 1.2. And then the last part that is covered by all Zowe components is all Zowe components do access through SAF, and there is a neutral ESM abstraction layer for that's enterprise security management systems, and we have coverage for the 3 primary ESMs in the market: RACF, Top Secret, and ACF2. With respect to multi-factor authentication, that is supported today in the application framework, which includes the virtual desktop, and it's coming very soon for the CLI. And with respect to role-based access control, that is today supported in the application framework. Next slide, please. So with respect to resilience and scalability, so the API mediation layer and the CLI inherently support resilience and scalability because they are of stateless design. For the application framework, that is in development right now to support high availability and fault tolerance. And this will also include eventually sysplex support, probably towards the end of Q3. And then for all of the ZOS components of Zowe, it is planned to have them be Dockerizable by the end of Q3. And this also addresses resilience and scalability due to other technologies like Docker Swarm that enables you to have many Docker containers working in concert. The only exception to this in terms of Docker support would be the back-end ZOS specific microservices. Next slide. And in terms of serviceability, a lot of that is handled by the LTSR and Cupid's projects that were discussed by Bruce. And in addition, we have API support for viewing log output and setting the log trace level dynamically. This is supported today in the application framework and in the CLI, and it's on the roadmap for the API mediation layer. And I believe that's the last slide. Is that right, or is there one more? That is the last slide. Thank you. John, you're on mute.
Sorry, double mute here. Well, thank you everyone for participating in today's webinar and all the great panelists that we've seen here. We do have a little bit of time for questions here at the end. If you are in the background, if you have some questions, you can either hit the chat or probably preferred is if you could use the Q&A feature here that's on the in the bottom panel here, where you can ask any questions here. So if you have that, please go ahead and queue those up in the background here. I guess while we're getting some of those questions in here, just to close, you know, there are a lot of different ways that you can participate, not only in Zowe, but just really any of the projects hosted here. You know, these are all very great ways that are to get engaged in the technical discussions, from the mailing list to looking at events, which, as you know, a few of those are around events that are going virtual. Looking at some of the development updates from our technical communities on our blog. We have a very vibrant Slack channel. The Zowe project is very active there, and I would really encourage you to check that out. And then also look at meetups and forums, and even if you're interested in starting one, we're happy to work with you on that. One other check we want to have here is on the Open Mainframe Summit, which is coming up in September. The call for papers is still open. It's getting ready to close here very soon. So if you have a call for paper that you're interested in, please go ahead and submit it. And you can also register for it as well. And last and certainly not least, keep up with the project. We're on LinkedIn and Twitter. You can follow us. We post a number of updates a day from things happening around the industry, things happening within our communities. We really try to put a lot of that first and foremost, and some of the great stories that are happening inside of our communities. Definitely check both of these out, both on LinkedIn and Twitter. And with that, I gave everyone a chance to ask some questions. I don't see any popping through at the moment. If anyone has any, maybe I'll give it a moment here. Again, use the Q&A chat panel that's at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions that you might have. But I have to say, I mean, I think what we're seeing here from the Zowe community, if I look at some of our other projects here at the Linux Foundation, you can definitely tell that this project is taking a really big step up here, establishing an LTS and really honing in on the conformance program for maturity. And we see a lot of projects, they start to get into this phase of thinking about the downstream quality and making sure that there's a solid ecosystem being built. These are the steps that we're starting to see. And this is what opens it up for different vendors to be able to build products off of this or leverage this in their products, and end users and customers to be able to take this technology internally to really help reduce a lot of your internal costs. So I got to say, this is a really, really impressive position that we're in at the moment here. And it's a lot of hard work from a large community that is putting hours and hours, days and days, months, weeks of just tons of effort into this. Just as a reminder, this entire webinar will be recorded. As an attendee, you'll get a notice when that happens, and it'll be up on our YouTube page for people to preview later, and especially as you want to share it across some of your colleagues and other parts of your organization. Well, I don't see any questions that have came in, so I'm going to say that maybe we wrap up for today. And I want to thank all of the panelists that stepped in here. Bruce, Peter, Rose, you did a fantastic job. The material was fantastic, and you really showed a lot of, showed how this community is really becoming much more broader and sustainable. So thank you so much. And with that,
you're welcome. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Take care.